Welcome to Life Stories. Imagine building an empire for decades, sacrificing everything, including love, only to discover that you've missed the most important thing of all, your child. One moment, a single note turns a man's world upside down, forcing him to face the family he didn't know he had and the father he never thought he could be. It's a story of second chances, painful truths, and the unthinkable decision between empire and family. What happens when success isn't enough? When your greatest achievement isn't the deal you close, but the child you're trying to build a future with. Stay with us as we unravel a journey of redemption, the fight for love, and the hardest choice of all, fatherhood. Now, let's dive into Ethan's story. Ethan Rivers sat at the head of the polished, dark wood conference table, the soft glow of the chandelier above casting a warm hue on the room. At 45, he had everything most men could dream of: an empire built from the ground up, a lifestyle of luxury, and a future paved in limitless possibilities. Rivers Enterprises, under his leadership, had become a titan in the tech world, a name spoken with respect in boardrooms and corporate circles across the globe. Yet, as he sat there, his mind wasn't on the quarterly projections or the lucrative deals ahead. His thoughts were far from the sleek glass skyscrapers and bottom lines that had defined his life for the last 2 decades. Instead, they were drawn to a single, crumpled napkin that had appeared on the table moments before. The note on it was simple, written in a child's neat handwriting, but its words struck Ethan like a physical blow. He had barely read the first line when his heart froze in his chest. "My grandmother Margaret is dying. She says you're my father. We're at Rosewood Shelter. Please come before it's too late." The napkin trembled in his hand as his mind raced back to a time long buried, back to Olivia, the love he had left behind in his relentless pursuit of success. The years had been unkind to Ethan's heart. He had chosen ambition over love, ruthlessly pushing Olivia aside to climb the ladder, telling himself it was for the better. He had ignored her calls, walked away from her pain, and never looked back. Now, almost a decade later, this cryptic message had pulled him back to a life he thought he had abandoned. His stomach churned with a mix of guilt and disbelief. Olivia had kept this secret from him. Sophia, their daughter, had been here all along, waiting for a father who had never known her. The realization hit him like a tidal wave. He had never known he had a child, and now he was about to meet her. "Excuse me," Ethan said, his voice steady but distant as he placed the napkin down. "I need to leave. Family emergency." The words felt strange, foreign, leaving his lips as if he had just uttered something he never thought he'd say. As he exited the restaurant, the cold night air did nothing to cool the firestorm brewing inside him. He didn't know what he was walking into, but one thing was clear: his life was about to change in ways he could never prepare for. 20 minutes later, his Bentley pulled up to the Rosewood Shelter, a stark brick building that stood as a quiet monument to the people who had nowhere else to go. The faint yellow light from the windows cast long shadows on the ground, amplifying the eerie sense of uncertainty that gripped Ethan. He had spent years building a world of control and certainty, and now, in the midst of this bleak shelter, he was face to face with the consequences of his choices. He stepped out of the car, his heels clicking on the pavement as he walked towards the shelter's entrance. Inside, the director, a tired-looking woman with weary eyes, led him down a narrow hallway to a small office. "She's been asking for you," the director said quietly, her voice tinged with an empathy Ethan couldn't bring himself to process. "Margaret insisted we find you if anything happened." The words felt like they had been dragged out of her. Margaret, Olivia's mother, who had fought so hard to keep Sophia safe. Ethan's throat tightened. He had failed them both. The girl who entered the room stopped him in his tracks. She was tiny, no older than 8, with blonde hair that cascaded around her face like a halo, but it was her eyes that made his heart stop. Her eyes, the same shade of blue as his, stared back at him, filled with an innocence and confusion that shattered the carefully constructed walls around him. She extended her wrist, revealing a crescent-shaped birthmark, identical to the one Ethan carried. "Sophia," his daughter. The word felt foreign in his mouth. He knelt down, struggling to maintain composure. "Hello," she said softly, her voice as fragile as the air around them. "I'm Sophia." Ethan couldn't speak. The world outside the small room blurred. This wasn't just a child standing before him. This was the product of a love he had abandoned. This was everything he had left behind. "How did you find me?" he finally asked, his voice barely a whisper. Sophia's small fingers twisted nervously at the hem of her sweater. "Grandma kept a box with your business cards and newspaper clippings. She showed me your picture before she got really sick." The word struck Ethan like a punch to the gut. Olivia had kept his picture all these years, kept him alive in their daughter's heart, despite everything. He felt a sharp pang of regret. "Emily never told me about you," he said, anger and sorrow lacing his words. Sophia shrugged, her eyes never leaving his. "Mom said you were building important things. She said you had your own life." The room grew smaller as Ethan absorbed her words. Olivia had chosen to protect him, to shield him from the responsibility of fatherhood, and in doing so, she had carried the burden alone. She had done this for him, but at what cost? "Why didn't she tell me?" Ethan's voice cracked. Sophia's eyes, so much like his own, blinked up at him. "She said someday, when I was old enough, I could decide if I wanted to find you." Ethan swallowed hard. The weight of the years spent in silence, the years he had let slip by, seemed unbearable in that moment. He had built an empire, but at the cost of everything that truly mattered. "Margaret passed 3 days ago," the director spoke again, her voice soft, almost as if she was afraid to break the fragile silence. 3 days. Sophia had been alone. She had been mourning her grandmother without a family to comfort her. Ethan's heart twisted in ways he couldn't describe. "I want to take her home," he said abruptly, his voice firm but trembling. "Tonight." The director blinked, surprised. "Mr. Rivers, there are procedures." "I'll have my lawyers handle that," Ethan interrupted, his gaze fixed on Sophia. "But I'm not leaving her here." As they left the shelter, Ethan watched Sophia carefully. She seemed so small in the vastness of his world, so fragile in contrast to the corporate titan he had been just hours before. "Are you sure you want me?" Sophia's voice, small and vulnerable, broke through the silence. The question caught him off guard, a simple yet devastating inquiry. Ethan knelt down, bringing himself to her level. "I didn't know about you until tonight," he said softly, his voice thick with emotion. "I have no idea how to be a father," he admitted, the truth spilling out, raw and unpolished. "But yes, I want you. We'll figure this out together." Sophia's lips curled into a ghost of a smile. "Okay," she said, and for the first time that night, Ethan felt the tiniest flicker of hope. What would you do if you were in Ethan's shoes, suddenly faced with a past you never knew existed? How can a man who has spent his entire life building an empire learn to build a family? As Ethan watches his daughter sleep, a new chapter of his life begins, one that may change everything. Will he be able to balance both worlds, or will his past mistakes be too much to overcome? Ethan stood at the edge of the penthouse balcony, his hands gripping the cold glass railing. The city stretched out before him, a sea of lights that mirrored the complexity of his thoughts. Below, the world buzzed with activity, but up here in his sleek glass tower, everything was too quiet. His empire, built meticulously over 2 decades, felt like it was slipping through his fingers, like sand in the wind. He had always known what to do. Business had been his world, his love, his obsession. But this child, this daughter he had never known, was something entirely different. Sophia had changed everything. She had entered his life like a hurricane, sweeping through the careful plans he had so carefully laid out. And now, as he gazed out at the sprawling city, he wondered if he could ever go back to who he was before. The night had been a blur of uncertainty. As he and Sophia had settled into the penthouse, Ethan had tried to make everything right. He ordered takeout from her favorite place, set up her room the best he could, and even managed to keep the conversation light, pretending everything was normal. But deep inside, a storm was raging. He was doing his best to be the father he never thought he'd be. But how could he fill shoes he had never even tried on? Sophia was asleep now, but her presence lingered in the apartment, filling the spaces where Ethan's carefully curated life had once stood. He moved through the halls, touching objects, his expensive watches, the awards lining his walls, his polished furniture. But it all felt meaningless now. He was alone in a world he had built to keep him from feeling alone. The next day, he awoke early, as was his routine. The first thing he did was check his phone. There were a dozen messages from his team, updates about the Seattle acquisition. The board was still waiting for his decision. He had to make a call, one way or another. He felt the familiar pull of duty, the responsibility that had kept him anchored to his work for so long. The business came first, didn't it? It always had. As he stepped into the kitchen, he found Sophia sitting at the counter, her feet dangling above the floor, staring at the cereal boxes in front of her. She was quiet, her expression unreadable. "Good morning," he said, trying to sound natural. "Did you sleep well?" Sophia nodded, her eyes fixed on the cereal box, not quite meeting his gaze. "Can I have the one with the blue lid?" she asked, her voice soft but steady. Ethan smiled, reaching for the box she wanted. He had no idea what kids ate, but at least he could handle this. As he poured the cereal into a bowl, his thoughts wandered again, this time to the looming custody battle. Robert Harrison had filed for custody. Ethan had never expected this, not from a man who had been absent from Olivia's life, who had ignored her and their daughter for years. But now, with Sophia living with him, Robert had suddenly decided that he was the concerned uncle, the one who should raise her. Ethan clenched his jaw as he set the cereal in front of Sophia. "This isn't just about the business," he reminded himself. "This is about her future." As he watched her pick at the cereal, he realized just how much he had to learn. He had spent so long building a world of precision where every move was calculated and every risk measured. But this, fatherhood, was messy, unpredictable. There were no spreadsheets for this, no boardrooms, no financial projections. After breakfast, Ethan decided it was time to take Sophia out to try and make her feel more comfortable. They went to the park, a small one near the penthouse, but even there, Ethan felt out of place. He wasn't used to the attention of other parents, the questions, the small talk. He wasn't used to being here, in this world of picnics and play dates. He had always been in control, always the man with the answers. But now with Sophia, he had no answers. As they sat on a bench, Sophia played with a small toy she had brought with her. Ethan watched her, feeling a strange mixture of awe and guilt. This was his daughter, but he didn't know her. He didn't know what she liked, what made her laugh, what scared her. He felt like a stranger in his own life. "Do you miss your mom?" he asked quietly, his voice almost lost in the sound of children playing nearby. Sophia paused, her small hands stilling on the toy. "I miss her a lot," she whispered, her eyes downcast. "But I don't want you to be sad about it." Ethan's heart ached at the simplicity of her words. She was so young, and yet she understood loss in a way he had never imagined. "I'm not sad," he said quickly, but his voice faltered. "I'm just figuring things out." Sophia looked up at him, her blue eyes so much like his own. "I know," she said softly, "but it's okay if you're not perfect." Those words, so innocent, hit him harder than anything else had. He hadn't been perfect. He had been absent. He had chosen everything else over the woman he loved, over their daughter. And now he was trying to fix it all, but he didn't know how. He had spent years building walls around himself, around his heart. And now, Sophia was making him question everything he had ever known. Later that afternoon, as they returned to the penthouse, Ethan's phone rang. It was Rebecca, his longtime assistant. She had news about the custody hearing. "Ethan, you need to get to the courthouse," she said, her voice urgent. "Robert's attorney has filed a motion for emergency custody. The judge may rule as early as tomorrow." The news hit him like a punch. He knew Robert wasn't just fighting for Sophia's well-being. This was about power, about control. And now, Ethan was at the mercy of the courts, the media, and his own decisions. The pressure was mounting. He was running out of time. As he walked to his office, he couldn't help but wonder, what kind of father was he really? Could he protect Sophia? Could he make up for all the lost years? Sophia was the one thing in his life that he had never expected, and yet she had become the most important part of it. But was it too late for them? Could he really be the father she needed him to be? Do you think Ethan is truly capable of changing, or is he too late to make up for lost time with Sophia? With the custody battle heating up and a life-changing decision looming, how far will Ethan go to fight for his daughter's future? The clock is ticking. Ethan sat in the cold, sterile courtroom, the weight of the world pressing down on his shoulders. The judge, a woman with stern features and unreadable eyes, had called for a brief recess, and now he found himself sitting alone in the hallway, his thoughts swirling in a chaotic storm. Sophia was in the small room across the hall, with her lawyer, a soft-spoken woman who had become an unexpected ally in the chaos. He could hear the low murmur of voices, but the sound was distant, as if it were coming from another world entirely. Ethan's mind kept returning to the same thought. I never should have waited this long. Every day he had spent away from her, away from his daughter, felt like an eternity. Every missed moment, every opportunity to be there for her, now felt like a brick he had added to the wall between them. He couldn't fix the past, no matter how hard he tried, but what he could do was fight for her future. The door to the courtroom opened, and his lawyer, Rebecca, stepped out. She walked over to him, her face a mask of professionalism, but her eyes betrayed the strain of the situation. They're deliberating, she said, her voice steady but lacking the usual confidence. The judge is taking everything into consideration. It could go either way. Ethan nodded, his chest tightening. Go either way. Those words haunted him, echoing in the silence. He had built an empire, but none of it mattered now. Not the skyscrapers, not the million-dollar deals, not the billions in the bank. His life, his success, none of it would matter if he lost Sophia. She was the only thing that truly mattered now. He turned his gaze to the door across the hall, where Sophia sat, unaware of the storm that raged outside. She was just a little girl, trying to make sense of a world that had been turned upside down. And he was the one who had done it. He had abandoned her before she even had a chance to know him. The door opened again, and Sophia stepped out, her eyes red from crying. She didn't meet his gaze at first, but when she did, the vulnerability in her eyes pierced through him. "Daddy," she whispered, her voice small and fragile. Ethan's heart shattered at the sound of the word. Daddy. He had never been called that before, and it felt like a promise he wasn't sure he could keep, but he would try. He would give everything he had to keep that promise. "Hey, sweetheart," he said softly, crouching down to her level. "How are you feeling?" Sophia shook her head, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "I don't want to leave you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Ethan's heart clenched. Leave me? The thought of losing her, of her being torn away from him, was more than he could bear. He had been given a second chance at life, at fatherhood, and he wasn't about to let it slip through his fingers. "You're not going anywhere. I promise you that," he said, his voice firm, though his own doubt lingered in the back of his mind. "No matter what happens, you'll always have me. I won't let you go." Sophia nodded, her small hand gripping his tightly. But there was fear in her eyes, a fear that was beyond her years. Ethan could see it clearly now, the doubt, the uncertainty. She was afraid he would leave her, just like everyone else had. "I'm scared," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan felt his breath catch in his throat. He wanted to tell her everything would be fine, but he couldn't. The truth was, he didn't know what would happen. The judge could rule in Robert's favor. The media was already in a frenzy, speculating about the future of Rivers Enterprises and the custody of Sophia. His world was falling apart, piece by piece, and all he wanted was to hold on to her, to protect her from the fallout. "I know you're scared," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "But I'm here, Sophia, and I'm not going anywhere. I'll fight for you, no matter what." They stood there, locked in a moment of silence. the weight of the decision before them hanging in the air. Ethan could hear the low murmur of voices coming from the courtroom, but it all felt distant, like it didn't matter anymore. What mattered now was this little girl in front of him, the daughter he had never known, and the life they could build together. The courtroom door opened, and the bailiff called for the parties to return. Ethan's heart was pounding in his chest as he took Sophia's hand, squeezing it gently. He couldn't protect her from everything, but he could be there for her. He could show her day by day that he would never leave her, never abandon her the way he had once abandoned Olivia. As they walked into the courtroom, Ethan's mind raced with uncertainty. The judge would make her decision soon, and he had no idea which way it would go. But one thing was clear. He had already made his choice. He had chosen Sophia. And no matter what the court decided, no matter what the board said, he would not let her go. The judge entered the room, her gaze sweeping over the room before settling on Ethan and Sophia. She paused, taking in the small family before her. It was clear to anyone with eyes that the bond between them was real, undeniable. "Mr. Rivers," the judge began, her voice calm but firm. "This court has considered all evidence presented, including the emotional and physical well-being of the child. The Harrison family has presented their case, but it is clear that you have made significant efforts to ensure your daughter's well-being." Ethan's heart was in his throat as the judge continued. "However," she said, her gaze unwavering, "the court must also consider the stability and security of the child. And though it is evident that you have made considerable changes in your life, the timeline of these changes and the potential impact on Sophia's future are of concern." Ethan held his breath, waiting for the judgment to fall. But then the judge paused, and in that brief moment, time seemed to stretch out endlessly. "The court has ruled," she said, her voice measured. "Custody will be granted to Mr. Rivers, with the stipulation that Sophia maintains regular contact with the Harrison family. The court acknowledges Mr. Rivers' commitment to his daughter and the changes he has made in his life to accommodate her needs." Ethan felt the floor drop from beneath him, the weight of the words settling in his chest. He had won. He had fought for her. And he had won. But even as the relief washed over him, a part of him still ached. He had missed so much, but now he had time to make things right. As they left the courtroom, Sophia looked up at him, her eyes wide with a mixture of surprise and relief. "You won, Daddy?" she whispered, her voice full of wonder. Ethan smiled, his chest tight with emotion. "Yes, sweetheart, I won." And for the first time in his life, Ethan Rivers felt like he had everything he had ever wanted. Not the empire, not the money, not the success, but the love of a daughter who had given him the chance to start again. What would you have done if you were in Ethan's position, caught between the business world and the emotional ties of family? If you feel moved by this story, leave a 100 in the comments. Where are you watching from? Let us know in the comments. Don't forget to share this video with your friends. Thank you for watching on the Life Stories channel.